She sat quietly in the corner of the conference room, notebook in hand, invisible to the men in expensive suits who spoke in hushed tones around the mahogany table. They saw her as just another translator, a middle-aged woman hired to handle basic Mandarin correspondence. Then she heard something that made her blood run cold, a phrase that wasn't supposed to exist, spoken by someone who claimed not to speak Chinese. In that moment, everything changed. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning fog rolled across San Francisco Bay, wrapping the glass towers of the financial district in a gray shroud. Inside the 42nd floor of the Meridian Corporate Center, Elena Rodriguez arranged her materials with the same methodical precision she'd practiced for 15 years. Legal pad, 3 black pens, a small digital recorder, and her worn leather portfolio containing Chinese-English dictionaries that most people assumed she actually needed. The conference room buzzed with the controlled energy of high-stakes business. Men in tailored suits shuffled papers, checked their phones, and spoke in the clipped tones of people accustomed to being heard. Elena took her usual seat near the back corner, close enough to catch every word, far enough away to remain unnoticed. "Good morning, everyone," announced Richard Whitman, senior partner at Blackstone & Associates. His silver hair was perfectly styled, his navy suit impeccable. "We're here to finalize the Henderson Technologies acquisition. Our colleagues from Beijing should be joining us shortly." Elena opened her notebook, pen poised. To everyone in the room, she was Elena Rodriguez, freelance translator, hired through the usual channels to facilitate communication with their Chinese partners. Her resume listed her previous work with small import companies, tourist agencies, and community colleges teaching basic Mandarin classes. Competent but unremarkable, necessary but forgettable. She'd cultivated this image carefully. The modest clothing, the quiet demeanor, the way she nodded politely when introduced and then seemed to fade into the furniture. It was a skill she'd learned long ago, how to become invisible while remaining completely present. The conference room door opened and 3 men entered. They wore Western business attire, but moved with a formality that suggested different cultural backgrounds. The lead figure, a man in his 50s with graying temples, stepped forward. "Gentlemen, I am Zhang Wei, representing Henderson Technologies." His English was heavily accented but clear. "These are my associates, Liu Ming and Chen Dao." Elena made note of their names, but her attention focused on something else entirely. The way Zhang Wei's eyes swept the room, cataloging faces and positions. The way Liu Ming's gaze lingered on the exits. The way Chen Dao's hand briefly adjusted something inside his jacket. These weren't just businessmen nervous about a deal. These were professionals assessing an environment. But she kept her expression neutral, her pen moving steadily across the page as she prepared to document the proceedings. "Please, have a seat." Whitman gestured to the chairs across from his team. "I believe we have our translator here to assist with any communication issues." He nodded briefly toward Elena. "Miss Rodriguez, was it?" "Yes, sir. I'm here to help with any translation needs." Zhang Wei glanced at her dismissively. "That will not be necessary. My English is sufficient for business." The meeting began in earnest. Contracts were distributed, terms were discussed, and Elena dutifully took notes. The acquisition involved Henderson Technologies, a Chinese manufacturer of computer components, being purchased by an American consortium led by Blackstone & Associates. On the surface, it appeared to be a straightforward business transaction. But Elena noticed details that others missed. The way certain financial terms were discussed with unnecessary specificity. The emphasis placed on particular facilities and their locations. The careful attention to employee retention clauses, particularly for technical staff with security clearances. 20 minutes into the meeting, something shifted. Zhang Wei leaned back in his chair and addressed Liu Ming in rapid Mandarin. To most people in the room, it would have sounded like a brief consultation between colleagues. But Elena understood every word. "The shipping manifests from the Oakland facility, are they clean?" Zhang Wei asked. Yes, but the FBI has been asking questions about the frequency of our exports, Liu Ming replied. We need to accelerate the timeline. After this acquisition, we'll have legitimate cover for the semiconductor transfers. Elena quietly spoke next, his voice barely above a whisper. What about the contact at the defense contractor? Is he still reliable? Thompson, yes, but he's getting nervous. We may need to find another source for the classified specifications. Elena forced herself to maintain the same bored expression she'd worn all morning. She couldn't let anything in her posture or demeanor suggest that she understood what she was hearing. Her years of training had taught her to compartmentalize, to process information without betraying recognition. The English conversation continued around these Mandarin exchanges. Charts were reviewed, timelines were discussed, and everyone in the room except Elena appeared focused solely on the legitimate business at hand. They had no idea that a spy ring was coordinating its operations right in front of them. As the morning progressed, Elena began to understand the scope of what she was witnessing. Henderson Technologies wasn't just being acquired, it was being used as a front for industrial espionage. The Chinese team wasn't just business executives. They were intelligence operatives using this legitimate transaction to expand their network of American assets. During a brief recess, as people stepped out for coffee or phone calls, Elena remained in her seat, reviewing her notes. She'd developed a system years ago of taking dual notes, official translations on the lined pages and her real observations in a shorthand code along the margins that looked like random doodles and symbols. David Morrison, one of the junior associates from Blackstone, approached her table. He was young, probably fresh out of law school, eager to make a good impression. "Interesting morning," he said, making small talk. "How long have you been doing translation work, Miss Rodriguez?" "About 15 years," she replied with a mild smile. "It pays the bills." "Must be nice knowing another language like that. I took 2 years of Spanish in college and can barely order a burrito." He laughed at his own joke. Elena chuckled politely. "Languages have always come naturally to me. Chinese is actually my fourth language." "Fourth? Wow! What are the others?" "Spanish, obviously, French, and a little Russian." She shrugged as if it were no big deal. "I've always been good at picking up patterns." Morrison nodded, impressed but not particularly interested. He wandered back to his colleagues, leaving Elena alone with her thoughts. If only he knew that her language abilities had been honed not in classrooms but in intelligence training facilities. That her little Russian was actually fluent enough to conduct interrogations. That her pattern recognition skills had been developed over years of analyzing intercepted communications and identifying security threats. When the meeting resumed, Elena noticed that Zhang Wei's attention had sharpened. He seemed more focused on the Americans across the table, studying their reactions to various proposals. At one point, he made a comment to Chen Dao that chilled Elena to the bone. "The naval specifications Thompson provided were incomplete. We need the full acoustic signature data for the new submarine class." Elena's pen trembled slightly, but she caught herself. Naval specifications, submarine acoustic signatures. This wasn't just industrial espionage. This was national security intelligence being stolen and transmitted to foreign operatives. She forced herself to breathe normally, to maintain the facade of a bored translator earning her daily fee. But inside, her mind was racing through protocols, procedures, and the chain of contacts she would need to activate once this meeting ended. The morning stretched on, with more coded exchanges mixed into the legitimate business discussion. Elena learned about dead drops, communication schedules, and a network of American assets that included at least one person with access to classified defense information. She learned about payment methods, extraction procedures, and plans to recruit additional sources within the American technology sector. By the time lunch break was called, Elena had documented enough information to dismantle an entire espionage operation. But she also knew that her most dangerous challenge was yet to come: leaving this building without raising suspicion and getting this intelligence to the people who could act on it. As the participants filed out of the conference room, chatting about restaurant recommendations and afternoon scheduling, Elena packed her materials with the same careful routine she'd followed all morning. Just another translator finishing another routine assignment, invisible and forgettable. But Zhang Wei paused near her table as he passed. "Ms. Rodriguez," he said in English, his tone casual, "have you worked with Chinese companies before?" Elena looked up with the mildly curious expression of someone making polite conversation. "A few times, import-export companies mostly. Nothing as significant as this transaction." He nodded, seeming satisfied. "Good. Discretion is important in these matters." "Of course," Elena replied. "I understand client confidentiality." He smiled and continued toward the door, joining his colleagues for lunch. But Elena caught the brief look he exchanged with Lu Meng, a look that suggested they weren't entirely convinced by her performance. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. As the conference room emptied, Elena remained behind, ostensibly organizing her notes, but actually running through contingency plans. She had what she needed, but getting it to the right people without exposing herself was going to require every skill she'd learned in her previous career. The career that officially didn't exist, and the career that everyone in this building assumed she'd never had. The afternoon session began with a different energy. The morning's formal introductions had given way to the detailed mechanics of the acquisition, and Elena noticed that the Chinese delegation had relaxed their guard slightly. This, she realized, would be when the real intelligence gathering would occur. Elena had spent the lunch break in the building's cafeteria, picking at a salad while reviewing her coded notes. She developed the notation system during her years with the Defense Intelligence Agency, a career that had officially ended 8 years ago when she'd requested reassignment to civilian consulting. The truth was more complicated. Elena Rodriguez, freelance translator, was a deep-cover identity that allowed her to continue serving her country in ways that traditional intelligence officers couldn't. Her handler, a man she knew only as David, who posed as a small business insurance agent, received her reports through an encrypted messaging system disguised as recipe exchanges on a cooking forum. To anyone monitoring her communications, Elena appeared to be an enthusiastic home cook, sharing techniques for authentic Mexican cuisine with online friends. In reality, she was passing intelligence that had prevented 3 terrorist attacks, exposed 2 foreign asset networks, and provided early warning on numerous industrial espionage operations. But this case felt different. The scope of what she was uncovering suggested a long-term, well-funded operation with tentacles reaching deep into American defense infrastructure. This wasn't opportunistic intelligence gathering. This was systematic penetration of critical national security assets. When the meeting reconvened at 1:30, Elena noticed that Zhang Wei had changed his tie. A small detail, but one that suggested he'd left the building during lunch. Had he reported to handlers, received new instructions? Elena filed the observation away as she resumed her position in the corner of the conference room. "Before we continue with the technical specifications," announced Whitman, "I'd like to address the security clearance transfers for key personnel." Elena's attention sharpened. Security clearances meant access to classified information. If the Chinese were acquiring not just a company, but also the cleared personnel who worked there, they were gaining something far more valuable than manufacturing capabilities. Dr. Sarah Chen, Henderson Technology's Chief Technology Officer, opened a thick folder. Elena noted with interest that despite her Chinese surname, Dr. Chen spoke with a crisp American accent and had been introduced earlier as a Stanford graduate. "We currently have 47 employees with various levels of security clearance," Dr. Chen explained. 12 have secret clearance, 3 have top secret, and 1 has special access program authorization. Zhang Wei leaned forward with obvious interest. "These clearances would transfer with the acquisition?" "In most cases, yes," replied Morrison, the young associate Elena had spoken with earlier, "though some positions may require additional review by the Defense Security Service." Elena watched Zhang Wei's reaction carefully. His expression remained neutral, but she caught the slight tightening around his eyes. This was what he'd been waiting for, not just access to Henderson's technology, but access to cleared personnel who could provide ongoing intelligence. Chen Dao spoke quietly to Lu Meng in Mandarin. The one with special access program clearance, we need his personnel file. Already arranged, Lu Ming responded. Thompson has access to the security database. We'll have the complete background investigation file by tomorrow. Elena's blood ran cold. Thompson, the name they'd mentioned earlier as their source for naval specifications. Whoever Thompson was, he had access to security clearance databases, which meant he was likely someone within the Defense Security Service itself, or possibly the FBI Security Division, a mole in the security apparatus responsible for protecting classified information. The conversation continued in English, with detailed discussions of facility security, IT infrastructure, and personnel policies. But Elena was processing the implications of what she'd learned. If Zhang Wei's team had access to security clearance files, they could identify vulnerabilities in cleared personnel, financial problems, family issues, personal scandals, anything that could be leveraged for recruitment or blackmail. Dr. Chen pulled up a presentation on her laptop, projecting it onto the conference room's large screen. "This slide shows our current project portfolio," she explained. The screen displayed a grid of technical projects with innocuous-sounding names: adaptive signal processing, thermal management systems, network protocol optimization. But Elena recognized the terminology. During her DIA years, she'd seen similar euphemisms used to describe weapons systems development. Adaptive signal processing likely referred to radar or sonar technology. Thermal management systems probably involved heat signature reduction for stealth applications. Network protocol optimization sounded like cybersecurity or electronic warfare capabilities. Zhang Wei studied the presentation intently. These projects, are they all commercial applications? Primarily, Dr. Chen replied smoothly, though some have dual-use potential. We do have several contracts with defense contractors who adapt our technologies for military applications. Lu Ming whispered to Zhang Wei, "The submarine acoustic dampening project, is it listed here?" "Third row, second column," Zhang Wei murmured back. "Thermal management systems." Elena felt another piece of the puzzle click into place. Henderson Technologies wasn't just being acquired for its commercial value. It was being targeted because of its defense contracts, particularly its work on submarine technology. The Chinese were essentially purchasing a window into American naval capabilities. As the afternoon wore on, Elena began to notice subtle patterns in the questions being asked by the Chinese delegation. They showed particular interest in Henderson's relationship with Newport News Shipbuilding, the company responsible for building American nuclear submarines. They asked detailed questions about Henderson's security protocols, their data storage systems, and their communication networks with defense contractors. During a brief pause while technical documents were being distributed, Elena overheard Zhang Wei speaking quietly on his phone. He was speaking in a dialect of Mandarin that she recognized as originating from the Shanghai region, but with specific terminology that suggested military intelligence training. "The secondary objective is proceeding smoothly. We should have full access to the submarine detection algorithms within 60 days of acquisition completion." Elena's pen moved steadily across her notepad, maintaining the appearance of routine note-taking while her mind raced through the implications. Submarine detection algorithms were among the most closely guarded secrets in naval warfare. If the Chinese gained access to American detection capabilities, they could develop countermeasures that would render the U.S. submarine fleet vulnerable. When Zhang Wei finished his call, he rejoined the conversation as if nothing had happened. But Elena noticed that Chen Dao was now taking much more detailed notes, and Lu Ming had begun asking very specific questions about Henderson's data backup procedures and off-site storage facilities. "Mr. Zhang," said Whitman, "I hope you don't mind my asking, but your English has improved considerably since this morning. Have you had additional training?" Zhang Wei smiled easily. "I find that business discussions help me practice, and I am quite motivated to make this acquisition successful." Elena caught the momentary look that passed between Lu Ming and Chen Dao. Zhang Wei's improved English wasn't the result of practice. It suggested that he was much more fluent than he'd initially pretended.
The accent and grammatical errors from the morning session had been a performance, designed to make the Americans underestimate his language comprehension. This revelation sent a chill down Elena's spine. If Zhang Wei understood English better than he'd let on, had he been monitoring her reactions throughout the day? Had he noticed anything that might suggest she understood their Mandarin conversations? Dr. Chen was now discussing Henderson's research and development pipeline. Our next-generation projects include advanced materials research, quantum computing applications, and artificial intelligence development. Artificial intelligence, repeated Zhang Wei with obvious interest. This would include machine learning algorithms? Absolutely. We're particularly focused on pattern recognition systems that can process large amounts of sensor data in real time. Elena recognized this description immediately. Pattern recognition systems for sensor data are the foundation of modern missile defense systems. Henderson wasn't just working on commercial AI. They were developing the algorithms that could identify and track incoming threats. Lu Ming spoke quietly in Mandarin. The Missile Defense Project, how much access will we have? Complete access, Zhang Wei replied. Once the acquisition is finalized, we'll control all research data, source code, and development personnel. Elena forced herself to maintain her neutral expression while internally calculating the national security implications. If a foreign intelligence service gained control of American missile defense algorithms, they could develop weapons specifically designed to overcome those defenses. The meeting was interrupted by a knock on the conference room door. A young woman in business attire entered carrying a stack of legal documents. "Excuse me, Mr. Whitman, but these require your immediate signature." While Whitman reviewed the papers, Elena observed the Chinese delegation more closely. Zhang Wei was studying the other Americans in the room with an intensity that went beyond normal business interest. He seemed to be cataloging their reactions, their body language, their level of awareness about what was really being discussed. Chen Dao was using his phone to take pictures of documents on the table, but he was being extremely subtle about it. The phone remained in his lap, and he was using the camera zoom function to capture details without anyone noticing. Anyone except Elena, who had been trained to recognize such techniques.
Lu Ming was sketching what appeared to be random doodles on his notepad, but Elena realized they were actually facility diagrams. He was mapping the layout of the Henderson Technologies headquarters, noting security checkpoints, server room locations, and emergency exits. When Whitman finished signing the documents, the meeting resumed with discussions of the transition timeline. "We anticipate completing the acquisition within 90 days, announced James Patterson, Blackstone's senior partner who had joined the afternoon session. During that period, Henderson will continue normal operations under existing management. "And security protocols?" asked Zhang Wei. "Will remain in place throughout the transition," Patterson assured him. "All classified projects will continue under existing security arrangements until the transfer is officially completed." Elena caught the satisfied look that passed between the Chinese operatives. 90 days would give them plenty of time to position their people, establish communication channels, and begin the systematic extraction of classified information. As the afternoon session drew to a close, Elena noticed that the atmosphere in the room had shifted. The Chinese delegation appeared more confident, more relaxed. They had gotten what they came for. Not just a business acquisition, but a foothold in American defense technology that would provide intelligence value for years to come. Zhang Wei stood and shook hands with each of the Americans. When he reached Elena's corner of the room, he paused. "Ms. Rodriguez, thank you for your assistance today. Your discretion is much appreciated." "Of course," Elena replied with a professional smile. "I hope the acquisition proceeds smoothly." "I'm confident it will," Zhang Wei said. Then, almost as an afterthought, he added in Mandarin, "Have a pleasant evening." It was a test. Elena recognized it immediately. If she responded in Mandarin, she would reveal that she understood the language better than she'd let on. If she looked confused, she would confirm her cover story. "I'm sorry," Elena said, tilting her head with the polite confusion of someone who didn't understand. Zhang Wei smiled and repeated in English. "I said, have a pleasant evening." "Thank you," Elena replied. "You as well." But as Zhang Wei walked away, Elena caught Lu Ming watching her carefully. Her performance had been convincing, but something in Lu Ming's expression suggested the Chinese team wasn't entirely satisfied with their assessment of the translator in the corner. As the meeting officially concluded and participants began gathering their materials, Elena packed her belongings with the same methodical care she'd shown all day. But her mind was already moving to the next phase of her operation. She had documented a sophisticated espionage network, identified multiple security breaches, and uncovered a plot that threatened critical national defense capabilities. Now she had to get this intelligence to her handlers without compromising her cover or alerting the Chinese operatives that their conversation had been understood. The challenge was that Lu Ming's suspicious glance suggested she might already be under surveillance. As Elena left the conference room, she made a mental note of every person in the hallway, every security camera, and every possible exit route. Her years of training had taught her that the most dangerous moment in any intelligence operation was the transition from gathering information to reporting it. The Chinese delegation was still in the building, and Elena had a strong suspicion that her evening was about to become much more complicated than a simple trip home to her apartment in the Mission District. Elena stepped out of the Meridian Corporate Center into the cool San Francisco evening, her senses hyper-alert despite maintaining the casual demeanor of someone finishing a routine workday. The fog had lifted, revealing the glittering lights of the bay, but Elena's attention was focused on the reflection in the building's glass facade behind her. Lu Ming was standing near the elevator bank, phone pressed to his ear, his eyes tracking her movement through the lobby. She turned left on Montgomery Street, walking at the unhurried pace of a woman heading home after a long day. Her apartment in the Mission District was 12 miles away, but Elena had no intention of leading potential surveillance to her actual residence. Instead, she began executing a surveillance detection route she'd mentally mapped during the afternoon session. 3 blocks down Montgomery, she ducked into a Starbucks and ordered a large coffee, positioning herself at a table with a clear view of the street. Through the window, she watched a dark sedan with tinted windows cruise slowly past. The vehicle was too clean, too nondescript, the automotive equivalent of trying too hard to be invisible. Elena pulled out her phone and opened what appeared to be a social media app, but was actually an encrypted communication platform disguised as a recipe-sharing website. She began typing what looked like a review of today's lunch special, but was actually an urgent message to her handler using a code they'd established years ago. Today's fusion cuisine was fascinating. The chef combined traditional ingredients with unexpected techniques. The main course featured imported seafood with complex preparation methods that revealed surprising depth. The presentation suggested significant investment in both ingredients and training. Recommend immediate consultation with management about expanding this concept. Several courses require special handling due to their sophisticated nature. To anyone monitoring her communications, Elena had just posted an enthusiastic restaurant review. In reality, she'd just informed the Defense Intelligence Agency that she'd uncovered a major espionage operation involving foreign intelligence operatives, defense contractors, and corrupted security personnel, requiring immediate counterintelligence response. As she sipped her coffee, Elena noticed a familiar figure across the street. Chen Dao was browsing in a bookstore, but his position gave him a clear line of sight to the coffee shop. Professional surveillance, but not quite professional enough. They were covering her, which meant her performance during the meeting hadn't been as convincing as she'd hoped. Elena finished her coffee and headed back onto the street, this time turning toward the financial district's BART station. She needed to execute a more complex surveillance detection route while creating an opportunity to gather additional intelligence on the Chinese operation. The evening commute provided perfect cover for counter-surveillance maneuvers. Elena boarded a crowded train heading toward the East Bay, standing near the doors where she could monitor passengers boarding and exiting at each station. At the MacArthur station, she spotted Lu Ming 2 cars down, confirming that the surveillance was persistent and well-coordinated. Instead of exiting at her usual stop, Elena rode the train to its terminus in Richmond, then immediately boarded a train heading back toward San Francisco. The maneuver forced any surveillance team to reveal themselves by either following her obvious route change or losing contact entirely.
Liu Ming had disappeared, but Elena noticed a woman in her 30s with short black hair who had also made the round trip. New player, probably Chinese intelligence, but with better training than the business delegation. Elena's phone buzzed with what appeared to be a text message from her sister, but was actually a coded response from her handler. Love your restaurant reviews. Found a great cooking class tonight if you're interested. Address attached. The cooking class was actually an emergency meeting location, a safe house in Oakland that Elena had never used before. Her handler was taking her intelligence seriously enough to activate protocols reserved for the highest priority operations. But first, Elena needed to gather more information about the Chinese surveillance team and their operational capabilities. Instead of heading directly to Oakland, she took a detour through Chinatown, using the neighborhood's familiar terrain to test her pursuers' local knowledge and reaction times. The narrow streets and dense crowds of Grant Avenue provided excellent opportunities for surveillance detection. Elena stopped at several shops, using reflective surfaces and crowd dynamics to identify her watchers. The short-haired woman was still there, but she'd been joined by a man in his 50s who moved with the careful precision of someone with military training. Elena ducked into a traditional herb shop, ostensibly browsing dried roots and medicinal teas, while actually observing the street through the shop's front window. The surveillance team had positioned themselves at opposite ends of the block, maintaining visual contact while avoiding clustering. Professional technique, suggesting this wasn't an improvised operation, but part of a larger intelligence infrastructure. She purchased a small bag of ginseng tea and struck up a conversation with the elderly shopkeeper in Mandarin, using the opportunity to test whether her surveillance team could overhear and understand the exchange. Elena spoke loudly enough for anyone outside to catch fragments of the conversation, discussing traditional Chinese medicine while secretly hoping to provoke a reaction from her watchers. "My grandmother always said ginseng helps with memory," Elena told the shopkeeper, "especially when you need to remember complicated recipes or family stories." "Ah, yes," the shopkeeper replied. "Memory is very important, especially for things that happened long ago or things that must not be forgotten." Elena caught the subtle emphasis in his words and realized this wasn't random conversation. The shopkeeper's eyes were alert, intelligent, and he was speaking with the careful diction of someone choosing his words precisely. Sometimes, Elena continued, people forget that others might be listening to family stories. They think only family members understand the old dialect. "Very true," the shopkeeper nodded, "but careful families teach their children to recognize all the dialects, even the ones that sound like business language." Elena's pulse quickened. The shopkeeper was either incredibly perceptive or he was connected to one of the intelligence services monitoring her. His reference to business language and all the dialects suggested he knew exactly what kind of conversation she'd been monitoring earlier. She paid for her purchase and left the shop, now certain that the Chinese operation was more extensive than she'd initially realized. They had assets throughout the city, people positioned to identify and monitor potential threats to their espionage network. Elena's phone buzzed again. "Cooking class starts soon. Traffic might be heavy. Suggest an alternate route via Bay Bridge." Her handler was telling her that the surveillance had been noticed and that she should take evasive action before heading to the safe house. Elena boarded a bus heading toward the Bay Bridge, using the vehicle's frequent stops and multiple exit points to break surveillance contact.
At the Transbay terminal, Elena executed a classic intelligence maneuver known as a dry cleaning operation. She entered the building through the main entrance, moved quickly through the shopping level to the restrooms, then exited through a service corridor that led to a different street entirely. The technique required intimate knowledge of the building's layout, knowledge that Elena had acquired during months of preparation for exactly this type of situation. 20 minutes later, Elena arrived at an unremarkable office building in Oakland's Jack London Square district. The address her handler had provided led to what appeared to be an accounting firm, but Elena knew that the third floor housed a DIA safe house disguised as a small business consulting company. She took the elevator to the third floor and found Suite 312, where a brass nameplate read Pacific Business Solutions. Elena knocked once,
paused, knocked twice, then once again, the recognition signal her handwear had embedded in his text message. The door opened to reveal a man in his 40s with graying hair and the solid build of someone who stayed in excellent physical condition. Alina knew him only as David, though she suspected that wasn't his real name, any more than Alina Rodriguez was hers. "Come in," David said, gesturing her into what looked like a typical office space, complete with cubicles, computers, and motivational posters. But Alina noticed the reinforced windows, the electronic countermeasures equipment discreetly positioned around the room, and the fact that none of the computers were actually connected to anything. "You've stirred up quite a hornet's nest," David said, closing the door behind her. "Your message triggered alerts all the way up to the National Security Council." Alina pulled out her notebook and began translating her coded observations into a comprehensive intelligence report. "This isn't just industrial espionage," she said. "They're building a network that could compromise multiple aspects of our national defense infrastructure." She spent the next hour walking David through everything she'd observed: the sophisticated coordination between Zhang Wei's team, their access to classified submarine technology, the mysterious Thompson, who apparently had access to security clearance databases, and the systematic targeting of Henderson Technologies' defense contracts. "The submarine acoustic dampening technology is particularly concerning," Alina explained. "If they gain access to our stealth capabilities, they can develop countermeasures that would put our entire Pacific Fleet at risk." David listened intently, occasionally asking for clarification or additional details. When Alina finished her briefing, he leaned back in his chair with a grim expression. "This explains some intelligence gaps we've been tracking for the past 18 months, he said. "We've noticed that Chinese naval vessels have been demonstrating improved anti-submarine capabilities, but we couldn't identify the source of their technological advancement." Alina realized that her discovery was part of a much larger pattern. "How long has this been going on?" "Based on what you've uncovered, probably years. The Henderson acquisition isn't the beginning of their operation, it's the culmination. They've been positioning assets, corrupting personnel, and establishing cover identities for a long-term intelligence gathering campaign." David pulled up a classified database on a secure terminal and showed Alina a map of the United States with red dots marking known or suspected Chinese intelligence operations. The West Coast was particularly dense with markers, suggesting a coordinated effort to penetrate American defense technology companies. "Your intelligence fills in several missing pieces," David continued, "but it also creates a tactical problem. If we move too quickly to shut down the Henderson acquisition, we'll alert the entire network that they've been compromised. They'll disappear, destroy evidence, and restart their operations with better security." Alina understood the dilemma immediately. "But if we let the acquisition proceed, they'll gain access to classified technology that could compromise national security for decades." "Exactly. Which is why we need you to go back." Alina felt a chill of apprehension. "Back to the conference room?" "Back to the entire operation. We need you to maintain your cover, continue monitoring their communications, and help us identify the full scope of their network before we dismantle it." David explained that Alina's unique position as a trusted translator gave her access that traditional intelligence operatives couldn't achieve. The Chinese team had accepted her presence, which meant she could continue gathering intelligence on their plans, their contacts, and their operational procedures. "The acquisition process will take 90 days, David said. "During that time, they'll be coordinating with assets throughout their network, moving money, transferring technology, and probably recruiting additional sources. We need to identify every component of their operation before we shut it down." Alina realized that she was being asked to maintain her cover while under active surveillance, continuing to attend meetings where she would overhear classified information while pretending not to understand its significance. It was one of the most challenging assignments in intelligence work, operating in plain sight while under direct observation by hostile operatives.
"What about Thompson?" Alina asked. "If he has access to security clearance databases, he could identify me if he runs a background check on Elena Rodriguez." "We've already thought of that,"
David replied. Elena Rodriguez's background has been backstopped with additional layers. If Thompson runs a check, he'll find a completely consistent identity with employment history, financial records, and personal relationships that support the translator cover story. David handed Elena a new phone, identical to her existing device, but loaded with additional security applications. This will allow us to maintain communication even if you're under active surveillance. The applications are disguised as normal social media and entertainment apps, but they'll let you pass intelligence without the Chinese team realizing what's happening. As Elena prepared to leave the safe house, David provided her with additional operational guidance. The surveillance team following you tonight suggests they're not entirely convinced by your cover story. Be prepared for them to test you in more sophisticated ways. They might try to engage you in conversation, place you in situations where your true knowledge would be difficult to conceal, or even attempt to recruit you as an asset. Elena considered the implications. If the Chinese intelligence team suspected she was more than just a translator, they might try to turn her into a double agent, feeding her false information while using her to identify American intelligence capabilities. "There's one more thing," David said as Elena reached the door. "We have reason to believe that Thompson isn't the only compromised asset in the security apparatus. There may be multiple sources providing the Chinese with intelligence on American counterintelligence operations. Trust no one outside this room until we understand the full scope of the penetration." Elena left the safe house through a different exit, emerging onto a side street that led away from Jack London Square. The fog had returned, providing natural concealment as she made her way back toward San Francisco. But she knew that the most dangerous phase of her operation was just beginning. The Chinese intelligence team now suspected that Elena Rodriguez might be more than she appeared. They would be watching her more carefully, testing her reactions, and looking for any sign that she represented a threat to their operation. Elena would have to maintain her cover while gathering intelligence on a sophisticated espionage network that was actively trying to determine whether she was friend or foe. As she boarded the last BART train of the evening, Elena reflected on the complexity of the game she was now playing. She was a deep-cover American intelligence officer pretending to be a freelance translator, being watched by Chinese operatives who suspected she might be an intelligence asset, while working to expose an espionage network that included corrupted American officials. The train pulled away from the station, carrying Elena back toward a confrontation that would test every skill she'd learned in 15 years of intelligence work. Elena arrived at the Meridian Corporate Center the next morning 30 minutes early, using the extra time to observe the building's security patterns and identify any new surveillance measures the Chinese team might have implemented overnight. The lobby seemed normal. Business professionals hurrying to elevators, security guards checking IDs, the usual urban morning rhythm. But Elena noticed subtle changes that suggested heightened awareness. The security desk had an additional guard, ostensibly there for a routine shift change, but positioned to observe everyone entering the building. Two men in business suits lingered near the newsstand, reading papers but clearly watching the elevator bank. Most telling of all, Elena spotted the short-haired woman from yesterday's surveillance team seated in the lobby cafe, nursing a coffee and pretending to work on a laptop. Elena signed in at the security desk, using her standard procedure, exchanging pleasantries with the guard about San Francisco's unpredictable weather while mentally cataloging the additional security cameras that had been installed since yesterday evening. Someone had been very busy during the night, and it wasn't building management. On the 42nd floor, Elena found the conference room already occupied. Zhang Wei stood near the windows, phone pressed to his ear, speaking in rapid Mandarin. But this wasn't the standard business dialect she'd heard yesterday. This was military terminology, mixed with intelligence jargon that confirmed her suspicions about his true background. "The security sweep of the building is complete," Zhang Wei was saying. "No electronic surveillance devices detected, but maintain protocols for sensitive discussions." Elena entered the room quietly, arranging her materials while Zhang Wei concluded his call. He acknowledged her with a polite nod, but she caught the sharp assessment in his eyes. The friendly businessman from yesterday had been replaced by someone much more calculating. "Good morning, Miss Rodriguez. I trust you had a pleasant evening." "Very peaceful. Thank you. I hope the jet lag isn't affecting your team too much." "We are quite adaptable." Zhang Wei smiled, but the expression didn't reach his eyes. "In fact, Lu Ming took a tour of your beautiful city last evening. He was particularly impressed with the diversity of your neighborhoods." Elena felt a chill of recognition. Zhang Wei was letting her know that Lu Ming had followed her surveillance detection route, that they were aware of her movements after leaving the building. It was a subtle threat disguised as casual conversation.
The morning session began with the arrival of new participants. Dr. Samuel Harrison from the Defense Security Service had flown in from Washington overnight to address security clearance transfer procedures. Elena recognized the significance immediately. DSS oversight meant that classified information would be discussed in much greater detail than yesterday's preliminary review. Dr. Harrison was a man in his 50s with the precise manner of someone accustomed to handling the most sensitive government secrets. He carried a briefcase secured with both electronic and mechanical locks, and Elena noticed that he performed a quick visual sweep of the room before taking his seat. "Before we begin," Dr. Harrison announced, "I need to verify that all personnel present have appropriate clearance for this discussion." Elena felt a moment of anxiety as Dr. Harrison's eyes settled on her. "Ms. Rodriguez, I understand you're providing translation services?" "That's correct," Elena replied steadily. "I've been cleared for this type of commercial work through the standard contractor vetting process." Dr. Harrison consulted a tablet, presumably checking Elena's background against security databases. Elena held her breath, hoping that the DIA's cover story would hold under official scrutiny. "Everything appears to be in order," Dr. Harrison concluded. "However, I must remind everyone that the information we'll be discussing today is classified at the secret level. Ms. Rodriguez, you'll need to sign additional non-disclosure agreements." As Elena signed the security documents, she realized that the Chinese intelligence team was about to gain access to classified information about American security procedures, clearance levels, and protective protocols. They weren't just acquiring a company, they were receiving a tutorial on how American national security systems functioned. Dr. Harrison opened his briefcase and removed several thick folders. "Henderson Technologies currently maintains contracts that require various levels of security clearance. I'm here to explain how those clearances will be handled during the ownership transition." Zhang Wei leaned forward with obvious interest. "Doctor, could you explain the different clearance levels and what access they provide?" Elena watched Zhang Wei carefully as Dr. Harrison began explaining the structure of American security clearances. Secret-level clearance provided access to information that could cause serious damage to national security if disclosed. Top-secret clearance covered information that could cause exceptionally grave damage. Special access programs represented the most sensitive compartmented information, often related to weapons systems, intelligence sources, or operational plans. "The employee with Special Access Program authorization," Dr. Harrison continued, "currently works on acoustic signature analysis for naval applications. This individual's clearance is specifically compartmented for submarine detection and countermeasure systems." Elena felt her stomach drop. Dr. Harrison was providing detailed information about the exact capabilities that Zhang Wei's team was most interested in acquiring. This wasn't just a security briefing, it was inadvertent intelligence sharing with hostile foreign operatives. Liu Ming spoke quietly to Chen Dao in Mandarin. "Record everything. The submarine detection specialist will be our primary recruitment target." "What about the Thompson contact?" Chen Dao whispered back. "Should we accelerate that timeline?" "Not yet," Zhang Wei interrupted softly. "Let Thompson continue providing background information. We don't want to expose him until we have direct access to the classified systems." Elena continued taking notes while processing the implications of what she was hearing. Thompson wasn't just providing security clearance information. He was apparently planning to facilitate direct Chinese access to classified computer systems. This suggested a level of penetration that went far beyond simple intelligence gathering. Dr. Harrison pulled up a classified presentation on his laptop, connecting it to the room's projection system. This slide shows the compartmentalized structure of special access programs related to naval technology. Elena felt a surge of alarm as classified diagrams appeared on the screen. The presentation showed the organizational structure of submarine technology, the relationship between different contractors, and the flow of classified information between government agencies and private companies.
Zhang Wei was taking detailed notes, but Elena noticed that he was also using his phone to photograph the classified presentation. The photos were being taken discreetly, with the phone positioned to appear as if he was simply checking messages while writing notes. "Dr. Harrison," Elena said, interrupting the presentation, "I notice that some of this information seems quite sensitive. Should I be taking notes on these particular sections?" Dr. Harrison paused, considering her question. "Good point, Ms. Rodriguez. Let me review what information is appropriate for inclusion in the meeting record." Elena's intervention had succeeded in drawing attention to the classified nature of the presentation, but she also noticed that Zhang Wei was studying her with renewed interest. Her question had demonstrated a level of security awareness that went beyond what would be expected from a simple translator.
During the break that followed, Elena found herself in an increasingly precarious position. She had succeeded in temporarily interrupting the intelligence leak, but she had also raised suspicions about her own background and motivations. Chen Dao approached her during the break, offering coffee from the conference room's refreshment station. "Ms. Rodriguez, you seem very knowledgeable about security procedures. Have you worked with classified information before?" Elena accepted the coffee while carefully considering her response. "Not directly, but I've worked with several defense contractors over the years. You pick up an awareness of security protocols just from being around that environment." "Ah, I see," Chen Dao nodded. "And which defense contractors have you worked with?" Elena provided the names of several companies that were part of her cover story, but she noticed that Chen Dao was listening with the focused attention of someone conducting an interrogation rather than making casual conversation. "Interesting," Chen Dao continued. "Have you ever worked with government translators? I imagine they have much more rigorous security requirements." Elena realized that Chen Dao was probing to determine whether she had any connection to government intelligence services. His questions were designed to identify inconsistencies in her cover story or reveal knowledge that a freelance translator shouldn't possess. "I've met a few government translators at professional conferences," Elena replied. "They definitely work under much stricter conditions than those of us in the private sector." When the meeting resumed, Dr. Harrison had modified his presentation to remove the most sensitive classified information. But Elena noticed that Zhang Wei's team seemed satisfied with what they had already obtained. Lu Ming was now asking very specific questions about the timeline for security clearance transfers and the procedures for accessing classified computer systems. "Once the acquisition is completed," Lu Ming asked, "how quickly would new management gain access to classified project files?" "That depends on several factors," Dr. Harrison explained. "New personnel would need to undergo background investigations, but existing cleared employees could continue working on classified projects under appropriate supervision." Elena realized that Zhang Wei's team was planning to use Henderson's existing cleared personnel as unwitting assets, having them continue their classified work while under Chinese management. It was a sophisticated approach that would allow the Chinese to access American secrets without directly compromising the security clearance system. As the discussion continued, Elena became aware that she was witnessing a masterclass in intelligence collection. Zhang Wei's team wasn't just stealing information, they were learning how American security systems worked, identifying vulnerabilities, and developing strategies for long-term penetration. But Elena also noticed that Zhang Wei was paying increasing attention to her reactions. Several times, she caught him watching her face when particularly sensitive information was discussed, as if trying to gauge whether she understood the significance of what she was hearing. The situation reached a critical point when Dr. Harrison began discussing the procedures for reporting security violations. "Any indication that classified information has been compromised must be reported immediately to the Defense Security Service," he explained. Zhang Wei's eyes locked onto Elena's face as Dr. Harrison spoke. It was a test. If Elena showed any sign of recognition or concern, it would confirm his suspicions that she was more than just a translator. Elena maintained her neutral expression while internally calculating her options. She could continue playing her role and hope that Zhang Wei's suspicions didn't develop into active countermeasures. Or she could find a way to alert Dr. Harrison to what was really happening in the conference room. The decision was made for her when Zhang Wei spoke in Mandarin to Lu Ming. "I want a complete background investigation on the translator. Contact Thompson immediately and have him run a deep security check on Elena Rodriguez." Elena's blood ran cold. If Thompson conducted a thorough investigation of her identity, he might discover traces of her real background that could compromise not only her mission, but also other American intelligence operations. She had to act quickly, but any move she made would expose her true identity and potentially trigger a violent confrontation with trained foreign intelligence operatives in the middle of a corporate office building. The next few minutes would determine whether Elena's cover held, whether the Chinese spy ring continued operating undetected, and whether classified American submarine technology fell into hostile hands. Elena glanced at Dr. Harrison, who was preparing to discuss the most sensitive aspects of Special Access Program security procedures. In moments, he would unknowingly provide Zhang Wei's team with information that could compromise American national security for decades. She had to make a choice that would either save her cover or save her country, but she was rapidly running out of time to do both.
Zhang Wei was already reaching for his phone to contact Thompson. In seconds, Elena Rodriguez would be subjected to the kind of security investigation that would reveal her true identity to Chinese intelligence operatives. Elena took a deep breath and prepared to make the most dangerous decision of her career. The moment of revelation had arrived, and there was no turning back. Elena watched Zhang Wei's finger hover over his phone screen, knowing that in seconds he would initiate a security investigation that would expose her true identity. Dr. Harrison was opening another classified folder, preparing to share information that would give the Chinese operatives everything they needed to compromise American submarine technology. The moment had arrived when Elena could no longer maintain her cover without allowing catastrophic damage to national security. She made her decision. "Dr. Harrison," Elena said clearly, her voice cutting through the conference room's quiet tension. "Before you continue, I need to inform you that this meeting is being conducted under false pretenses." The room froze. Every conversation stopped, every pen halted mid-sentence. Every breath seemed to catch in the sudden silence. Dr. Harrison looked up from his folder with confusion, while Zhang Wei's eyes snapped to Elena with the sharp focus of a predator recognizing an unexpected threat. "I'm sorry, Miss Rodriguez," Dr. Harrison said slowly. "Could you clarify what you mean?" Elena stood, her years of intelligence training taking over as she transitioned from deep cover to operational mode. "My name is not Elena Rodriguez. I'm Agent Sarah Chen with the Defense Intelligence Agency, and the individuals representing Henderson Technologies are foreign intelligence operatives conducting an espionage operation against the United States." The explosion of activity was instantaneous. Zhang Wei lunged for his phone while shouting in Mandarin to Lu Ming and Chen Dao. Dr. Harrison's hand moved toward the emergency alert button on his briefcase. The American businessmen around the table stared in shock, their minds struggling to process what they'd just heard. But Elena was already moving. Her 15 years of operational experience had taught her to anticipate the moments when cover identities would collapse, and she'd been preparing for this scenario since entering the building that morning. "Lu Ming has a concealed weapon," Elena announced, pointing to the slight bulge under his left armpit that she'd noticed during yesterday's meeting. "Chen Dao has been photographing classified documents, and Zhang Wei has been coordinating with assets inside American security agencies." Dr. Harrison's training kicked in immediately. Instead of reaching for his briefcase alert, he pulled out his cell phone and speed-dialed a number that Elena recognized as the FBI's counterintelligence emergency line. "This is Dr. Samuel Harrison, DSS," he said quickly into the phone. "I have a code red security incident at Meridian Corporate Center, 42nd floor. Request immediate response team." Zhang Wei was speaking rapidly into his phone in Mandarin, but Elena could understand every word. "Operation compromised. Initiate emergency extraction protocols. Sanitize all assets immediately." Elena realized that Zhang Wei wasn't just calling for help, he was ordering the destruction of evidence and potentially the elimination of witnesses.
Thompson and other assets throughout their network would be receiving orders to disappear or destroy compromising materials. "Mr. Whitman," Elena called to the senior partner, "you need to evacuate your staff immediately. These individuals are trained intelligence operatives and they may respond violently to exposure." But even as she spoke, Elena could see that the Chinese team was already implementing contingency plans. Lu Ming had moved to block the conference room's main exit, while Chen Dao was positioning himself near the windows. Zhang Wei had finished his phone call and was now studying Elena with the calculating gaze of someone reassessing a completely changed tactical situation. "Agent Chen," Zhang Wei said, using her real name with cold precision. "I assume that is your actual identity. You have created a most unfortunate situation." Elena felt a chill of recognition. Zhang Wei knew her real name, which meant the Chinese intelligence service had already identified her despite her deep cover identity. The Elena Rodriguez persona had been compromised from the beginning, and she'd been walking into a trap. "How long have you known?" Elena asked, buying time while calculating escape routes and potential defensive positions. "Since yesterday evening," Zhang Wei replied calmly. "Your surveillance detection route was quite professional, but you made the mistake of visiting your handler at the Oakland safe house. We've been monitoring that location for several months." Elena's mind raced through the implications. If the Chinese had been watching the DIA safe house, they had probably identified multiple American intelligence operations. David and other agents could be in immediate danger. Dr. Harrison had moved to the corner of the room, still speaking quietly into his phone while keeping his eyes on the Chinese operatives. Elena could hear fragments of his conversation. Multiple foreign agents, classified submarine technology, request a tactical response team. The building's fire alarm suddenly began blaring, and Elena realized that Zhang Wei's emergency call had triggered more than just extraction protocols. The Chinese team was creating chaos to cover their escape, and the alarm would force evacuation procedures that would complicate any law enforcement response. "Ladies and gentlemen," came an announcement over the building's public address system, "this is a fire emergency. Please evacuate the building immediately using the nearest stairwell." Elena watched as the American businessmen began gathering their papers and moving toward the exit, following ingrained emergency procedures. But she knew that the evacuation would provide perfect cover for the Chinese operatives to disappear into the crowds of office workers streaming out of the building. "Dr. Harrison," Elena called out, "those classified documents cannot leave this room. The Chinese team will attempt to steal them during the evacuation." Dr. Harrison immediately began securing his materials, locking files back into his briefcase and activating its destruction protocols. Elena realized that the briefcase was designed to incinerate its contents if tampered with, a safeguard against exactly this type of intelligence theft. But while Dr. Harrison focused on protecting his classified materials, Elena noticed that Chen Dao was making subtle hand gestures toward the other operatives. She recognized the signals from her intelligence training. They were coordinating a synchronized action. "Everyone down!" Elena shouted, just as Lu Ming reached inside his jacket. The conference room erupted into chaos as Elena dove behind the heavy conference table, pulling Dr. Harrison with her. The sound of breaking glass filled the air as Chen Dao used a chair to smash the room's windows, creating an alternative escape route. But instead of gunfire, Elena heard the distinctive whistle of electronic jamming equipment being activated. Lu Ming wasn't reaching for a weapon. He was deploying a device designed to block cell phone signals and electronic communications. "They're jamming communications," Elena told Dr. Harrison. "Your FBI call may not have gone through." Elena pulled out her DIA-issued phone and activated its emergency beacon, a satellite-based system designed to function even under electronic attack. The device would alert American intelligence services to her location and situation, but help could be minutes or hours away. Zhang Wei was now speaking in English, apparently deciding that operational security was no longer relevant.
Agent Chen, you have disrupted a carefully planned operation, but you have also revealed American counterintelligence capabilities that will be quite valuable to my superiors. Elena realized that Zhang Wei was treating her exposure as an intelligence gathering opportunity. By forcing her to reveal her true identity and operational methods, he was gaining insight into American intelligence techniques that could compromise future operations. The Henderson acquisition was never the primary objective, Zhang Wei continued conversationally, as if discussing routine business matters. It was bait designed to attract American intelligence attention and identify your operational capabilities. Elena felt a cold wave of understanding. The entire spy ring had been an elaborate deception. She hadn't uncovered a Chinese espionage operation, she had walked directly into a sophisticated intelligence trap. Thompson isn't your asset, Elena said, the pieces finally clicking into place. He's one of ours, and you've been feeding him false information to identify our security procedures. Very good, Zhang Wei smiled. Agent Thompson has been quite helpful in mapping American counterintelligence protocols, though I suspect his cooperation was not entirely voluntary. Elena's blood ran cold. If Thompson was an American agent who had been compromised and turned, it meant the Chinese had been using him to identify and target other intelligence operatives. Her own exposure might be part of a larger operation designed to roll up multiple American assets. The fire alarm continued blaring, but Elena could now hear another sound underneath it, the rhythmic thump of helicopters approaching the building. Either the FBI had received Dr. Harrison's emergency call before the jamming began, or her DIA beacon had triggered a response. Lu Ming was monitoring a handheld radio, listening to communications in rapid Mandarin. American tactical teams are surrounding the building, he reported to Zhang Wei. They're establishing a perimeter on all sides. Elena realized that the situation was escalating beyond a simple counterintelligence operation. If the FBI and DIA were deploying tactical response teams, they were treating this as a potential terrorist incident or major security breach. Zhang Wei, Elena said, you need to consider your options carefully. This building is now surrounded by American law enforcement. Your extraction protocols won't work if you're trapped inside.
Perhaps, Zhang Wei replied calmly, but we still have several valuable assets to protect, including the classified information that Dr. Harrison was so eager to share. Elena noticed that Chen Dao had retrieved something from the broken window, a small device that looked like a camera or recording equipment. The Chinese team had been documenting everything, including the classified presentations and security procedures that Dr. Harrison had discussed. The submarine detection algorithms, Elena said, understanding Dawn. You've recorded everything about our special access programs. Among other things, Zhang Wei confirmed, your government's willingness to share classified information with foreign businessmen has been quite educational. Dr. Harrison spoke up from their position behind the conference table. Agent Chen, my briefcase contains a localized electromagnetic pulse device. If activated, it will destroy all electronic equipment in this room, including any recordings they may have made. Elena considered the implications. An EMP burst would indeed destroy the Chinese intelligence recordings, but it would also eliminate her own communication equipment and potentially interfere with law enforcement response efforts. The sound of helicopters was growing louder, and Elena could hear boots in the stairwells. Tactical teams were entering the building despite the ongoing evacuation. The situation was rapidly approaching a confrontation that could result in casualties and international diplomatic complications. Zhang Wei, Elena called out, I'm going to make you an offer. Surrender peacefully, and I'll ensure that you're treated according to international law. Continue resisting, and you'll be facing American tactical teams who won't be as interested in preserving diplomatic relations. Zhang Wei's laugh was cold and calculating. Agent Chen, you still don't understand the full scope of what you've discovered. This operation extends far beyond the three of us in this room. Elena's phone buzzed with an encrypted text message from her handler. Buildings surrounded, Chinese consulate claiming diplomatic immunity for personnel inside. The situation is complicated. The message revealed a new dimension to the crisis. If the Chinese government was claiming diplomatic immunity for Zhang Wei's team, it meant they were officially acknowledging the intelligence operation while seeking to protect their operatives from American law enforcement. Elena realized that she was no longer dealing with a simple counterintelligence case. This had become an international incident with the potential to damage diplomatic relations between the United States and China. But she also knew that regardless of diplomatic complications, she couldn't allow classified American submarine technology to leave the building in Chinese hands. The conference room door suddenly burst open, and Elena saw the tactical gear and weapons of an FBI hostage rescue team. The moment of truth had arrived, and the next few minutes would determine whether years of Chinese intelligence planning would succeed or fail. "Federal agents!" came the shouted command. "Everyone on the ground, hands visible." Elena looked at Zhang Wei, who was smiling with the confidence of someone who believed he still held the winning cards in a game that was far from over. The FBI tactical team stormed into the conference room with military precision, automatic weapons trained on every person present. But Elena immediately recognized that Zhang Wei had been expecting this moment. Instead of showing surprise or fear, he raised his hands with the calm confidence of someone executing a carefully rehearsed plan. "I am Zhang Wei, cultural attaché with the Consulate General of the People's Republic of China in San Francisco. I invoke diplomatic immunity under the Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations." The lead FBI agent, a woman in her 40s with the hardened look of someone who had handled multiple international incidents, spoke into her radio headset. "Control, we have a diplomatic immunity claim, requesting State Department liaison immediately." Elena felt a surge of frustration as she watched Zhang Wei's strategy unfold. By claiming diplomatic status, he was forcing the American government to navigate complex international law while potentially allowing critical intelligence to escape. But Elena had spent enough years in intelligence work to recognize when operational flexibility was required. "Agent Martinez," she called to the FBI team leader, having read the name tape on her tactical vest. "I need to speak with you privately. There are complications you need to understand before proceeding." Agent Martinez gestured for Elena to the far corner of the room, keeping her weapon trained on the Chinese operatives while maintaining visual contact with her team. "Agent Chen, I presume, we received your emergency beacon 15 minutes ago." "The situation is more complex than a simple espionage case," Zhang Wei explained quickly. "Zhang Wei's team has been conducting a long-term operation to map American counterintelligence capabilities. They've compromised at least one American asset, and this entire scenario may have been designed to force us to reveal our operational methods." Agent Martinez processed the information while monitoring her team's positions. "What's your assessment of immediate threats?" "Lu Ming is armed, but I don't think they intend to resist violently. Their strategy is to use diplomatic immunity to escape with intelligence they've gathered, then disappear before we can challenge their diplomatic status." Elena's phone buzzed with another encrypted message from David. "State Department confirms Zhang Wei is not listed as diplomatic personnel. Immunity claim is false. Proceed with detention." Elena showed the message to Agent Martinez, who immediately relayed the information to her team. "Diplomatic immunity claim denied," she announced. "Subjects are not protected persons under international law." The change in Zhang Wei's expression was subtle but unmistakable. For the first time since Elena had revealed her identity, he looked genuinely surprised. His diplomatic immunity gambit had failed, which meant his team was now facing arrest and interrogation by American intelligence services. "Agent Martinez," Elena continued, "we need to secure all electronic devices and recordings. They've documented classified information about submarine detection systems that cannot be allowed to leave American custody." But as Agent Martinez began directing her team to search the Chinese operatives, Elena noticed that Chen Dao was making subtle hand movements that looked like sign language. She recognized the gestures from her intelligence training. He was communicating with someone outside the conference room. There are other assets in the building, Elena realized. Chen Dao is signaling to backup personnel. Agent Martinez immediately spoke into her radio. All units, be advised we may have additional hostile personnel in the building. Maintain a security perimeter and sweep all floors. The response came quickly. Control to team leader, we have visual on 3 additional subjects attempting to exit through the parking garage. They match the description of foreign intelligence operatives. Elena felt a moment of satisfaction as the FBI's tactical response began dismantling the Chinese network. But she also knew that the most critical phase of the operation was just beginning. Zhang Wei's team had gathered intelligence that could compromise American national security for years to come, and Elena needed to determine exactly what information had been stolen. Dr. Harrison had remained quiet during the FBI's entry, but now he approached Elena with obvious concern. Agent Chen, my classified materials are secure, but I'm concerned about what information may have been compromised during our discussions. Elena reviewed her mental notes from the past 2 days of meetings. They recorded detailed information about security clearance procedures, special access program structures, and the relationship between government agencies and defense contractors. They also obtained the identity of personnel with access to submarine acoustic technology. The implications were staggering. With this information, the Chinese intelligence service could target specific American personnel for recruitment, develop strategies for penetrating classified programs, and potentially compromise submarine detection capabilities that were critical to American naval superiority. Agent Martinez had completed the initial detention of Zhang Wei's team and was now coordinating with other FBI units throughout the building. Agent Chen, we've secured 6 additional suspects attempting to leave through various exits. It appears this was a much larger operation than initially assessed. Elena wasn't surprised. Professional intelligence operations typically involved multiple layers of personnel, from the primary operatives conducting the mission to support staff providing security, communications, and logistical assistance. We need to identify their communication methods, Elena told Agent Martinez. They've been coordinating with assets outside the building, including at least one compromised American official named Thompson. Agent Martinez nodded and spoke into her radio. Control, initiate immediate surveillance on all communication intercepts from this location. We need to identify external contacts and prevent intelligence from leaving the operational area. But Elena was already thinking beyond the immediate tactical situation. Zhang Wei's operation had been sophisticated enough to suggest significant resources and long-term planning. This wasn't an isolated espionage attempt. It was part of a broader intelligence campaign targeting American defense technology. Her phone rang with a call from David, her DIA handler. "Sarah, we've been monitoring the situation from our command center. How much intelligence do you think they've compromised?" "Substantial," Elena replied grimly. "They've mapped our security procedures, identified personnel with access to submarine technology, and probably gathered enough information to target additional assets. We're coordinating with the FBI to conduct an immediate damage assessment," David said. "But we also need you to debrief Zhang Wei's team. Your knowledge of their language capabilities and operational methods could be critical to understanding the full scope of their mission." Elena looked across the conference room at Zhang Wei, who was now secured in handcuffs but still maintaining the calm demeanor of a professional intelligence officer. She knew that extracting useful information from trained operatives would require sophisticated interrogation techniques, and even then, success wasn't guaranteed.
"David, there's something else," Elena said. "Zhang Wei indicated that Thompson may have been compromised and turned rather than being a willing asset. If that's true, we may have an American intelligence officer who needs immediate protection." "Already working on that," David replied. "We've initiated emergency protocols to locate and secure Agent Thompson. But Sarah, we need to discuss your status. Your cover identity has been completely blown, and there may be other Chinese assets who now know your real identity."
Elena realized that her 15 years of deep cover work had effectively ended with her decision to expose the spy ring. Elena Rodriguez would disappear, and Agent Sarah Chen would need to assume a new identity and new operational role. Agent Martinez approached Elena with a tablet displaying surveillance footage from throughout the building. Agent Chen, we've identified what appears to be a sophisticated surveillance network. Look at these camera positions. The footage showed strategically placed individuals throughout the Meridian Corporate Center, all positioned to monitor access points, security personnel, and emergency response procedures. The Chinese operation had been conducting comprehensive intelligence gathering on the building itself, probably in preparation for exactly the type of emergency extraction they had just attempted. They've been planning this for months, Elena observed. The Henderson Technologies acquisition was just the cover story. Their real objective was to map our counterintelligence capabilities and identify American assets. Agent Martinez scrolled through additional footage. We're seeing similar surveillance patterns at other corporate locations throughout the Bay Area. This may be part of a much larger intelligence operation targeting the entire regional defense industry. Elena felt a chill of recognition. If the Chinese were conducting systematic surveillance of multiple defense contractors, they were essentially mapping the entire American defense technology infrastructure in one of the country's most critical regions. Her phone buzzed with an urgent message. Thompson located and secured. He's been under duress for 6 months. The Chinese had compromised his family members overseas. Full debrief reveals extensive intelligence penetration. Elena showed the message to Agent Martinez, who immediately understood the implications. If they've been operating with a compromised American asset for 6 months, they may have gained access to far more than just the Henderson Technologies information. The scope of the Chinese intelligence operation was becoming clear. Zhang Wei's team hadn't just been conducting industrial espionage. They had been systematically penetrating American national security infrastructure, using compromised personnel to identify vulnerabilities and map defensive capabilities. Dr. Harrison approached Elena with additional concerns. Agent Chen, if they've had access to security clearance databases for 6 months, they may have identified and targeted multiple cleared personnel throughout the defense industry. Elena realized that the investigation was only beginning. Every person with security clearance who had been identified through Thompson's access would need to be interviewed, their activities reviewed, and their current assignments assessed for potential compromise. Agent Martinez, Elena said, we need to treat this as a potential compromise of the entire regional defense infrastructure. The Chinese may have gained access to information about submarine technology, missile defense systems, aircraft development, and cybersecurity capabilities. Agent Martinez was already coordinating with her command center. Control, we need immediate notification to all defense contractors in the Bay Area. Potential compromise of multiple classified programs. Initiate security review protocols for all personnel with relevant clearances. But Elena knew that damage assessment and security reviews would take months or years to complete. In the meantime, the Chinese intelligence service would be analyzing the information they had gathered and potentially developing countermeasures to American defense capabilities. Zhang Wei, despite being restrained and under arrest, seemed almost satisfied with the situation. Elena approached him carefully, knowing that professional intelligence officers often reveal more through their confidence than through direct interrogation. Zhang Wei, Elena said in Mandarin, your operation has been exposed, your assets have been arrested, and your intelligence network has been dismantled, but you don't seem particularly concerned. Zhang Wei responded in English, apparently no longer concerned about maintaining language deceptions. Agent Chen, you assume that what you have discovered represents the entirety of our capabilities. This operation was designed to be discovered. Elena felt a cold wave of understanding. Zhang Wei was suggesting that the entire spy ring had been sacrificial, designed to distract American counterintelligence efforts while protecting more valuable assets and operations elsewhere.
The real intelligence gathering has been happening in other locations, Elena realized. This was a diversion. Zhang Wei's slight smile confirmed her suspicion. While American law enforcement had been focused on the dramatic espionage operation at the Meridian Corporate Center, Chinese intelligence assets elsewhere had been conducting their actual missions without interference. Elena's phone rang again with an emergency call from David. "Sarah, we have a problem. While you were dealing with Zhang Wei's team, we detected major security breaches at 3 other defense contractors. It appears the Chinese have been conducting simultaneous operations across the entire region." Elena looked at Zhang Wei's satisfied expression and realized that despite exposing the spy ring, preventing the theft of classified submarine technology, and protecting American national security assets, she had also been manipulated into revealing American counterintelligence capabilities while the real Chinese operation succeeded elsewhere. The game was far from over, and Elena was beginning to understand that she had been playing by rules that the Chinese intelligence service had written specifically for her. 3 weeks after the confrontation at the Meridian Corporate Center, Elena sat in a secure briefing room at the Defense Intelligence Agency headquarters in Washington, D.C. The walls were lined with classified charts mapping the Chinese intelligence network that had been systematically dismantled following Zhang Wei's arrest. The scoop of what they had uncovered was staggering, but Elena knew that the real victory wasn't in the arrests. It was in what they had learned about Chinese intelligence capabilities and strategies. Director Rebecca Stone, Elena's ultimate superior at the DIA, entered the room carrying a thick folder marked with the highest classification levels. "Agent Chen, the damage assessment is complete. I think you'll find the results illuminating." Elena opened the folder to find a comprehensive analysis of the Chinese operation that painted a picture far more complex than anyone had initially realized. Zhang Wei's team had indeed been conducting real intelligence gathering, but their primary mission had been to test American counterintelligence responses and identify vulnerabilities in the security apparatus. The submarine acoustic technology was never their primary target, Director Stone explained. They were studying how quickly we could detect and respond to intelligence threats, what methods we used to investigate suspected espionage, and how our different agencies coordinated during security crises. Elena studied the assessment with growing understanding. They were conducting a penetration test of our entire national security system. Exactly. And unfortunately, they gathered significant intelligence about our capabilities and procedures. But there's also good news. Director Stone pulled up a classified presentation on the secure monitor. Because you maintained your cover for so long and gathered detailed intelligence on their methods, we were able to identify and neutralize 17 additional Chinese assets throughout the Pacific region. The network was far larger than Zhang Wei's team, but it was also more vulnerable once we understood their operational patterns. Elena felt a complex mix of satisfaction and concern. Her decision to expose herself had prevented immediate damage to submarine technology, but it had also revealed American counterintelligence methods that the Chinese could use to improve their future operations. "What about Thompson?" Elena asked. "Agent Thompson is recovering well. The Chinese had been blackmailing him by threatening his daughter who was studying in Beijing. Once we extracted her safely, Thompson provided complete intelligence on the Chinese network structure and objectives." Director Stone showed Elena photographs of Chinese operatives who had been arrested across multiple states. Thompson's information allowed us to identify assets we never would have found otherwise. The Chinese had been running parallel operations in Seattle, Los Angeles, and Austin, all targeting different aspects of American defense technology. Elena realized that Zhang Wei's confidence during his arrest had been justified. His team's exposure had been planned, but the Chinese hadn't anticipated that Thompson would be rescued and turned back into an American asset. "There's one more thing," Director Stone continued. "We've learned that your Elena Rodriguez identity was compromised from the beginning, but not in the way you think." Elena felt a chill of apprehension. "What do you mean?" "The Chinese didn't identify you through surveillance or investigation. They were given your identity by a source inside the American intelligence community." The implications hit Elena like a physical blow. There was a mole inside American intelligence services, someone with access to deep cover identities who had been feeding information to Chinese handlers. "We've identified the leak," Director Stone assured her quickly. Assistant Director Marcus Webb at the FBI had been providing the Chinese with information on American counterintelligence operations for over 2 years. He's been arrested and is cooperating fully with our investigation. Elena struggled to process the information. Webb had been a respected senior official with access to the most sensitive counterintelligence operations. His betrayal represented a massive security breach that could have compromised dozens of American assets and operations. "How did you identify him?" "Actually, you did. When Zhang Wei mentioned that they had been monitoring the Oakland safe house, we realized that only a handful of people knew about that location. Webb was one of them. And further investigation revealed financial irregularities and communication patterns consistent with espionage." Elena felt a bitter satisfaction. Her blown cover had ultimately led to the exposure of a high-level American traitor, but it had also ended her 15 years of deep cover work and potentially compromised other ongoing operations. "What happens now?" Elena asked. Director Stone smiled for the first time during the briefing. "You've been promoted to Senior Intelligence Officer and assigned to head our new Counterintelligence Innovation Division. Your experience with the Chinese operation has convinced leadership that we need to completely rethink how we approach foreign intelligence threats." Elena looked at the organizational chart that Director Stone placed on the table. The new division would be responsible for developing innovative approaches to detecting and countering foreign espionage, using lessons learned from the Zhang Wei operation to improve American defensive capabilities. "We're also implementing new security protocols for deep cover operations," Director Stone continued. "The Elena Rodriguez identity taught us that our traditional cover stories may not be sufficient against sophisticated foreign intelligence services." 6 months later, Elena stood in front of a class of new intelligence officers at the CIA training facility in Virginia. She was teaching a course called Modern Espionage and Counterintelligence, using her experience with the Chinese spy ring as a case study in contemporary intelligence threats. "The most important lesson from the Zhang Wei operation," Elena told her students, "is that foreign intelligence services are not just stealing our secrets, they're studying our methods, testing our responses, and developing strategies to exploit our institutional weaknesses." One of the students raised her hand. "Agent Chen, if the Chinese were testing our counterintelligence capabilities, does that mean they succeeded?" Elena considered the question carefully. "They succeeded in gathering intelligence about our methods, but they also exposed their own capabilities and lost a significant intelligence network. In intelligence work, success and failure are often mixed together in complex ways." Another student asked, "How do we prevent similar operations in the future?" "By understanding that the threat environment has evolved," Elena replied. "Foreign intelligence services are no longer just trying to steal specific technologies or recruit individual assets. They're conducting systematic campaigns to understand and exploit our entire national security infrastructure." After the class, Elena walked across the Virginia countryside surrounding the training facility. The peaceful rural setting contrasted sharply with the intense urban environment where she had spent 15 years maintaining her deep cover identity. Her phone rang with a call from Agent Martinez, the FBI team leader who had handled the tactical response at the Meridian Corporate Center. "Agent Chen, I thought you'd want to know that Zhang Wei was sentenced today, 25 years for espionage with no possibility of parole." "What about the rest of his team?" "Lu Ming and Chen Dao received similar sentences. The 3 additional assets we arrested are being deported after serving reduced sentences in exchange for intelligence cooperation." Elena felt a sense of closure, but she also knew that Zhang Wei's network had been replaced by new Chinese intelligence operations that were probably already adapting to the lessons learned from their predecessors' exposure. "Agent Martinez, are you seeing similar operations in other regions?" Actually, yes. The patterns you identified in the Zhang Wei case have helped us detect and prevent 3 other Chinese intelligence operations in the past 6 months. Your work has had a significant impact on our counterintelligence capabilities. After ending the call, Elena reflected on the complex legacy of her years as Elena Rodriguez. The identity had been blown, the deep cover operation had ended, but the intelligence gathered and lessons learned were helping to protect American national security in ways that she was only beginning to understand. As the sun set over the Virginia hills, Elena thought about the choice she had made in that San Francisco conference room. She had given up 15 years of careful identity construction and operational positioning to prevent the theft of classified submarine technology. But in doing so, she had also exposed a broader threat to American national security and helped develop new approaches to defending against sophisticated foreign intelligence operations. Elena Rodriguez, the quiet translator who had been dismissed and overlooked, was gone forever. But Agent Sarah Chen had emerged from that experience with a deeper understanding of the intelligence threats facing America and the innovative approaches needed to counter them. The game between American and Chinese intelligence services would continue, but now it would be played with a better understanding of the rules, the stakes, and the sophisticated strategies that modern espionage required. Elena looked at her new identification credentials: Senior Intelligence Officer Sarah Chen, Counterintelligence Innovation Division. It wasn't just a new job title. It was recognition that the old approaches to intelligence work were no longer sufficient for the threats America faced in the 21st century. The woman who had once sat quietly in the corner of conference rooms, invisible and underestimated, was now helping to shape the future of American national security. And, somewhere in Beijing, Chinese intelligence planners were probably trying to figure out how a simple translator had managed to dismantle one of their most sophisticated espionage operations. Elena smiled as she walked back toward the training facility. They would probably never understand that her greatest asset hadn't been her language skills or her deep cover identity. It had been her willingness to be underestimated while paying attention to everything around her. The skills that had made Elena Rodriguez an effective translator had also made Agent Sarah Chen an exceptional intelligence officer. And those same skills would now be used to train a new generation of American intelligence professionals for the complex threats they would face in an increasingly dangerous world.
Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.